So welcome everybody. We apologize for the late start and some of the technical difficulties. We have with us for now, Shai Goren, Combatants for Peace activist, who is going to give us a bit of a background about the election situation. And then Avrum Burg will be joining us in about 5 minutes to give more of his insight. But Shai's here just sort of as a general introduction. Burg is going to tell you but he's also stuck in traffic because Biden shut all the streets down. So his visit has created a little bit more difficulty there, but he'll be here in just a minute, and Shai's going to give a general overview of the situation before we begin. So Shai, turning it over to you. Can you unmute? You can't unmute.
That's it.
There we go. Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Great.
Wonderful. Beth, very nice to see you, and happy to be here with you all. This will be a couple of minutes introduction before Avrum will come to meet us, and let's hope that President Biden's visit is going to bring us positive things and not just traffic jams. We really are looking forward for that, especially for the parts visiting East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and hoping to reopen the consulate in Jerusalem. That will be meaningful steps. Let's see what happens by this visit and see if we have any reasons here to be optimistic. My name is Shai Goren. I'm a Combatants for Peace activist, and I work in the field of political tourism in Israel. So this introduction I do often about what happens with our political system. So just before Borg will begin, I think the important thing to say is that we are stuck in this country for 5 elections already. And for the last 2 years, we haven't found a way to come out of the system. And when you think about our political system, I think there are a couple of important things to emphasize when we're thinking about that. Well, first of all, what we see here is that neither of the blocs are managing to find a way to build a coalition. When I say blocs, I don't necessarily mean right-wing versus left-wing, or people that are pro-peace and people who oppose it and want to keep the occupation going. I mean necessarily right now, people who are trusting and supporting Netanyahu as a prime minister, and people who don't, who oppose Netanyahu's existence as prime minister. That's the story. You can find the right wing, the more soft one, in the camp that opposes Netanyahu. You can find obviously the left wing there, the Palestinian Israeli parties, and you can find the ultra-Orthodox within Netanyahu's camp. That doesn't necessarily mean that things will continue like that. And what we've seen in the last 5 election systems is a shift throughout the system. Parties that were traditionally teaming up with Netanyahu actually has decided to not team up with him anymore and to turn against his regime. And we saw a swap. We saw people from Netanyahu's party leaving and building a new party called New Hope. We saw Bennett with Yamina party, or pretty much traditionally always joining the coalition of Netanyahu, going against that. And we saw Ram, which is a party that represents to some extent the Islamic movement in Israel, joined the coalition, and that was the first time this was done. So a few important things I would say to put in mind. First of all, when we tally the vote, folks, we need a minimum of 3.25% in order to make it in. And that means that some small parties are on the edge of being erased. That means that the story or the image of the different political camps might look different. And right now, there are 2 political parties that, at least by the polls, we should trust them to some degree and not more than that. It seems like they will have a very hard time to pass that bar. One of them is Yamina, a party, the top party that was led by Bennett up until 1 week ago. Bennett decided that he's leaving and not continuing with political life, and now he's run by Ayelet Shaked. The other one is Meretz, which is a left party, joined the last coalition, and seems like it might have a harder time to make the cut. If any of those parties don't make it in, that changes the story of the blocs. And if neither of the blocs manage to get to 61%, but then one party is erased, then perhaps they might have a shot. That's an important thing to realize. A second thing is that the size of the parties themselves is not the most important thing. And we had times when the biggest political party didn't manage to build a coalition because of how their bloc was. And the best example of that was in the last election. In the last election, Netanyahu had the biggest seat, the biggest party in the parliament with the most seats, didn't manage to build a coalition because of how the block system worked. So on that election night in November, when we tally the votes and give out the numbers, please remember to count the blocks and not the parties, just, something might help us with that. Last thing is perhaps what just happened in the last year is we had a functioning coalition and we actually had a government for the first time in a very long time. That government had a very hard time to work, and we need to talk about what happened there and why are we going to elections right now. First of all, we need to remember that this experiment, we can say, which was to combine about 8 different political parties at once, is a strange idea. It wasn't usually the case. Usually you have a smaller coalition, but in this case, it was many of the parties in the House that joined together in order to turn against Netanyahu and to make sure that he won't be the next prime minister, as they see him as someone corrupt, his incitement went too far, they don't want to see him anymore. To do so, there was a wide coalition. And when we're thinking about the parties and the different ideas that they stand for, we had for the first time left parties like Meretz and Ra'am, and on the other hand, we had right-wing parties like Yamina and New Hope, which were folks that were part of Netanyahu's party Likud, up until 1 year ago. They managed to sit together and they managed to form a coalition which had disagreements, which perhaps wasn't the most useful in the world when we're talking about terms of the occupation, ending the occupation or enhancing it. On the other hand, if you support the right wing of views. But still, the coalition managed to work together. And that experiment, we can say, worked. And the main reason why it's falling apart is not because of the joining of Arabs to the coalition, was because of people in Bennett's party, who perhaps were not the best choice of that. Bennett didn't do perhaps as good as a job to address it to the public and to explain why is it doing the things it did, and is going home. But that means that all of the cards are now open, and we have to see what will happen. This might be a very close elections. With this, we're ending the introduction, and we're very thankful and happy for Avrum Burg to join us. So I'm continuing to Avrum and to Beth, and thank you very much, and have a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your background and commentary. So we're going to turn it over to former Speaker of the Knesset, Avrum Burg. Feel free again to put your questions into the chat. There's a ask questions here. You can put them in. You can send them directly to me, and we'll try and take questions as much as possible. But I'm going to turn it over. If you could give us an overview of what your assessment of what happened, what you think will happen, any other political insight you'd like to offer. And if you want to share a bit, we know Biden is in the region today, and I'm sure people are eager to hear about that as well. So turn the mic over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know if you're so happy about Biden in the region, but the reason for my 15 minutes lateness is because of the traffic jam. So if there is one contribution that President Biden contributed to the political process in Israel, is traffic jams. Having said that, I fully agree with the introduction and the landscaping of Shai. I would like just to add a couple of small nuances about the current situation in Israel. We are kind of a Costco kind of politics. Everything is two at the price of one. Not only we're a democracy, we are a Jewish democracy. So in Israel, we don't just have a democratic majority. By the end of each and every elections, we have two majority. Like in the last couple of elections, in brackets, let's talk a little bit about the numbers of elections. In every normal, solid, stable democracy, you have one elections every 4 years. In Israel, you have 4 elections every 1 year. But it's the same numbers, a little bit rearranged, or a little bit arranged a little bit differently. And the outcome of each and every one of the last 4 rounds is a very, very interesting one. On one hand, there is a clear, decisive, right-wing conservative majority in the Knesset. Now, Is it ultra-Orthodox conservatism? Is it settlers conservatism? Is it nationalistic conservatism? Not really clear, but it's a very clear, decisive right-wing majority. And on the other hand, there is a clear, decisive majority of no Netanyahu. And the political system in the last year's experimental government prioritized the no Netanyahu majority over the conservative majority. Will it hold for the next elections? Nobody really knows. What we see in front of our eyes at the beginning of the campaign is, I will say 2 or 3 points to pay attention to. First is from a Knesset that was very fragmented into small, tiny, little political parties, which were interest groups, which in many cases were identitarian political groups. There is a feeling that people moving towards assembling groups together in order to have less parties, and each party would be a bit bigger. The second thing is, there is hardly any ideology in this assemblance. There is hardly any ideological common denominators. People are moving together, separating or merging according to immediate, right away, here and now political interests, not necessarily according to shared values or to agreed upon principles. The last and not least about it is, many people talk about that the Mansour Abbas, the Muslim political Reshima Aravit Muslimit, whatever. I mean, the Arab Muslim party that was part of the coalition, that the experiment failed. And I think it is wrong. It didn't hold much. The government did not come down because of them. It came down because the prime minister's party simply dismantled and eventually, in a domino effect, brought down the whole structure. But nonetheless, I have a feeling that as for now, and maybe even for the next couple of rounds, the legitimacy of having an Arab party as part of the governmental coalition became normal. It was normalized, and this is the new normal in Israel. So I want to assume that whomever will be the next prime minister will have either a direct partnership with an Arab list, or at least an agreed upon support system that will enable Mansour Abbas and like Mansour Abbas to continue the promotion of the Arab interest in Israel within any given coalition, be it a right-wing coalition or a left-wing coalition. One question left open, and we're still checking the probability of it, is will there be a different pattern or a different model of Jewish-Arab partnership? As for now, we have 1 or 2 Arab members of Knesset at the Meretz party, which doesn't function as a shared equal list. We have 1 Jewish member of Knesset at the United List, but it's more of a fig leaf than an ideological 50-50 partnership. We have Mansour Abbas, which is completely Arab party, participating in in the Jewish majority coalition. The question is, will there be now, for the first time ever, a joint list which will be 50% Jews, 50% Arabs, 50% men, 50% women, to write together on the principle of the equality as the arch value of the collective good of the liberal progressive camp in Israel? Or is it still premature? The jury is out, cannot give you a good answer about it, but the attempts are very intensive.
Thank you. So we have a question in the chat box. Can I throw that in?
Yeah.
So do you think that immigration has any significant effect on political trends?
You mean the recent Ukraine-Russian immigrants to Israel?
The question doesn't specify, but
I don't think so.
no.
Israel is a society. Israel is a society of immigration, and at the first, when you have tidal waves of immigrants, you usually tend to see that they first try to be more Israelis than the Israelis, more nationalistic than the national, and later on there is a calm down, and then there is a cooling effect, and they become, or they spread, or they are divided as the rest of the Israeli society. I do not see any serious, significant fingerprint of the immigrants, especially the recent immigrants, on the contemporary, on the current political dynamics.
So we have another question. Thank you. We have another question from Ellen, who wants to know, when do the party lists have to be finalized, and when will we know which parties are going to run together?
It's a very interesting question. Usually in America, when the elections are over, unless it's a certain kind of a president, you usually know who won the election. So the elections are the decisive moment about the winner and loser. In Israel, once the elections are over, we begin the negotiation who actually won. So we shall know who are the parties, let's say, as late as September this year, what are the parties, what are the candidates, who is running, etc. Who will be the next prime minister? We shall know only by the days and the weeks after the elections, because it depends on the coalition, on the blocs, on the support each and every one of the candidates will be able to crystallize about his or her candidacy.
Great, thank you. What is the status of Netanyahu and the criminal charges against him?
The court procedures are very intensive and very much into it. As much as there are rumors and fears and phobias and conspiracies that once he will take over, he will succeed to cancel the trial, I do not think it's possible. Never mind what kind of legislation he will take, and never mind what kind of harsh measures he will take against the legal system, etc. The train left the station. What's the situation out there? I have no clue, because I do not really pay attention to political interpretation of the spins and spins over and counter spins and tweets and retweets, etc. These are all nice to have tomorrow morning's headlines. By the end of the day, 3 judges in Jerusalem to decide according to the facts and the evidence and the testimonies in front of them. They will do the job. It will take a couple of years, and let's see what they will decide. As for the political dimensions or the political importance of the trial, does it change one supporter's mind? All the nasty, unpleasant stories and anecdotes coming out of it was the one individual who decided, I'm not going to support Netanyahu because of the trial. I did not yet meet this individual. His supporters love him even more and believe it is all a conspiracy against him, and their opposition do not need the trial in order to say we cannot stand this individual and his royal family. So the trial is there and elections are here. And as for now, it's 2 parallel lines which do not really collide into each other.
Great, thank you. Do you think Israel is ever going to have a stable government for more than a few years? And how disruptive are these ever-changing governments, 5 in the last 2 years, on the people?
We had years in which we had stable governments. To tell you the truth, as a Jew, not as an Israeli, I do not want stable government. I mean, look at all the biblical stories. Moses took over at the age of 80, had a very long 40 years career. Not even one day of it was stable. It was a permanent kind of unrest, and people were unsatisfied and complaining and grouching and you name it. And in a way, the Jewish concept of checks and balances is never trust our leadership. So as a Jew who lives deep into his history, I like the fact that no leader is really stable, and therefore, yes, all along our history, we never had stable leadership, but yet, or at the same time, hardly ever in our history did we have tyranny. Having said that, I believe that the minute Netanyahu will be out of the system, one thing will be a gain out of the system, and this is the political system as a servant or almost enslaved to the interest of the one. The minute the political system will come back to be the interest of the collective, the capability to form a coalition around a shared idea will be much easier. Will it be a conservative one or a progressive one? Let's see. What Netanyahu and the Netanyahus did to the political process in Israel, it subjected the political process to the interest of the individual rather than to the service of the collective. And therefore, the stability is not because the society is that fragmented, which is that fragmented, but much more because it does not serve the collective good, but it serves the individual good, which is not good.
Thank you. So in light of Biden's visit, I'm going to jump this question to the front. So for those of us who don't live in Israel, is there anything that people can do to help?
Can get what?
Can do to help to push the elections for a more favorable outcome?
So how does this related to the beginning of your sentence about Biden's visit?
Oh, I'm speaking as an American. That's why I tied in Biden's visit.
What Biden visit has to do with the elections?
Nothing.
You mean you meet?
The question is simply,
Biden visit is sleepy, tired, exhausted, inconsistent, and embarrassing. Irrelevant to our political process. The real important thing in his visit here is the next step, which is Saudi Arabia or the Gulf or whatever. Will he be able to bring down the price of oil? For the midterm elections, as the Americans are saying, not my circus, not my monkey, I have no clue. Okay, as for our political process, it's irrelevant. It's a photo op that tomorrow morning we'll have 5 more. What can you do about our elections? That's very, very simple. Give us a majority on both houses.
So we need to fix our elections.
You got it.
Yeah, there we go.
You got it. That's the answer.
Fantastic. That's a very good answer. And we're in our own election year this year, so hopefully we will get both houses to be on the right side of this issue, the correct side of this issue, rather. So we've had a couple of questions I'm going to consolidate into one, but 20% of the voting electorate are Palestinian citizens of Israel. How does this affect the outcome for the next election? How has this affected things in the past, and how do you see this moving forward?
It's a virtual number. 20% of the population, or 19% of the population, belong to the Israeli-Palestinian community. But the level of participation is below 50%, and the predictions are already talking now about around 40% of participation. When you compare it to the Jewish community and to the Jewish component, is kissing the 80%, even 85% in certain cases. So they are dramatically undervoting and therefore underrepresented. The reasons why so many Israeli-Palestinian voters decided to withdraw from the political responsibility and the political participation is actually an expression of 2 kinds of disappointments. The first is a disappointment by their own representatives, or the incapability to deliver some political goods to them. And on the other hand is the pushback of the Jewish, conservative, unpleasant, almost racial, discriminative majority who say, we do not want you. So they say, if they, the majority, do not want us, and our representatives cannot represent us, what the heck? So the only way in which some, relatively speaking, more progressive government will be formed here after November's election is by as many possible Israeli citizens from Palestinian origin to vote for the Knesset. For this to happen, I do not believe that any American money for get out to vote and all of this a quick fix political excitement will fix it. The only way is to offer a different kind of partnership, deep, profound, respecting partnership, based not on the national definition, which is Jews and Arabs, but based on assured constitutional equality for all. And as for now, we do not yet have a party which is running on this platform. I'm working very hard for many, many years to form it. Let's see if it will be possible these elections. But as long as we do not have a platform which invites the Israeli Arabs, the Israeli Palestinians to be equal partners in the political process, I do not see any real change in the pattern of voting.
Thank you. And so to extend that question to Palestinians who are not citizens of Israel, especially specifically West Bank residents, but also perhaps Gaza, is this, how does this election affect those communities? Or does this election, in what ways does this election affect those communities?
It's very difficult to say because at the foreseeable future, let's say it will be Netanyahu's government or will it be Lapid's government, okay? The difference is in style and nuances, but not necessarily the big picture. The big picture is neither Netanyahu nor Lapid have any plan or readiness to resolve profoundly the Palestinian challenge. So you can say in matter of style, Netanyahu had a kind of a latent, dormant strategy which said, let's communicate with Hamas in Gaza in order to bring down the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank in Ramallah, in order not to give back territories, in order not to compromise the settlers, which is Netanyahu's base. Lapid, Gantz, and others say, let's fortify and strengthen the Palestinian Authority and try to weaken Hamas, and therefore have many beautiful gestures of employment and passages and other humanitarian gestures, but all in all, they are gestures and not solutions. So neither nor are going for a profound solution, though Lapid's one is much more generous and considerable to the humanitarian situation of the Palestinians, while Netanyahu is much more considerable to his own situation and his settlers' base interests.
Thank you. So can you comment on the alarming strength of the Ben Gvir Smotrich? I hope I pronounced that right.
Can I do what?
Can you comment on the strength of that coalition?
I will say here that we have to pay attention to two things. The first, these people represent a serious, realistic support in the psyche of public. In a way, they became, unfortunately, but they became legitimate, and we have to recognize it. Part of Israel is religious, fundamentalist, nationalist, racist, xenophobic, and you name it. It is there. It's not marginal. It's not exceptional. It's not an occurrence. It's a real, serious, deep social reality. The second is, and this is it's very, very interesting, both of them, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. One is coming from the Torah of Rabbi Kahana, one is coming from the depth of Israeli religious Zionism, are becoming more and more attractive to ultra-Orthodox voters. So they're at the deep right-wing conservative camp. There is a very interesting inner clash between the ultra-Orthodox and their communities and the ultra-nationalists that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich represent. So yes, they are a real thing. Yes, they have a growing power. Yes, it's not nice. Yes, we have to address it. And yes, it creates a conflict within the conservative camp.
Yeah. So we have a question here. I think this government fell with the non-renewal of regulations from the West Bank. What is the result of this non-renewal? And could you speak for those of us who need a little more background, the non-renewal of the regulations, if you could speak to that a bit more as well.
As dramatic as it's sounding only 2 minutes ago or 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, it's bullshit. Why it's bullshit? Because for 55 years, every 5 years, Israel has to renew the authorization of the military administration to operate, or all the legal dimensions to run the West Bank in such a situation that the Israelis there are answering to the Israeli law, and the Palestinians are having whatever other legal system. So for so many years, 55 years, under Labor governments and under Likud governments and under bipartisan governments, it was always renewed and renewed and renewed and renewed and renewed. And everybody, I mean, I didn't like it at all at each and every time it was renewed, but this was the way to address, to continue the situation of the occupation at the West Bank as if legally. Now, because of the political crisis, it was suspended for a couple of weeks, etc. Don't worry, it will be renewed. The way to bring down the occupation is not through a kind of a political accident at the parliament. The occupation will come to an end with a political agreement, not by political accidental circumstances. And this is nothing more than a political circumstances.
Thank you. So a question just came in. What is the chance realistically for a two-state solution?
Well, it's a different discussion than this one, because now we're about the coming elections.
Or rather, the question just got clarified. Does the majority of the voting public, do you think that this election, in terms of the voting public, is going to favor two-state candidates?
The whole Palestinian issue is removed from the table. Very few pay attention to it. It's not a topic in the elections. Maybe it's an elephant in the room, but it's a very transparent elephant. So it's not addressed and not dealt with. Forget about by the right wing, which has no interest to bring it up. Even the pathetic labor and even the poor Meretz civil rights movement actually do not bring it to the campaign. David Copperfield style disappeared for a while. It will come back, don't worry. I mean, this way or that way, unfortunately, it will come back. It's not a political issue in Israel today. And therefore, people do not vote according to it.
Thank you.
And people do not form coalitions according to it. I don't like it. I want it to be central. I want it to be decided. I want Israel to take measures, this measure or the other measure. But if I'm realistically, politically, it's off the table for the now.
Thank you. So where do you see any chance of the Israeli public moving in this election, either to the center left or to the left?
No, I see more of the same. I do not know which will it be more of the same, a little bit to the side of Yair Lapid, or will it be more of the same, a little bit to the side of Benjamin Netanyahu. I do not see any real paradigmatic shift in the voting pattern.
Thank you.
I didn't yet meet one individual, not even one, and I know many individuals. I didn't yet meet one individual who moved from the left grouping to the right-wing one, or any Netanyahu's disciple who moved to the Yair Lapid one. Did not yet see one. So I do not see why it will happen in these elections.
Thank you. So what about the large Mizrahi population? How does that community affect the election?
In a very not politically correct way, I will say it's an old question. It's a question which was related to the 80s and to the 90s. I do not think it plays a role now. Yes, of course, there is a deep background, but the deep background is not that I'm a Mizrahi and therefore I vote for the right. It is because I'm conservative and I belong to the ideologically to the conservative camp. So it's not an ethnical question. It's not a question of the country of the origin of myself or of my parents, as much as it is about my identity or sub-identity as a conservative who believes in tradition, who believes in maybe even rabbis, who believe in rituals, or believe in the right-wing values. But I do not see it as, I do not see these elections as Ashkenazim versus Mizrahim.
Thank you. So in the United States, we have a pretty noticeable difference between younger voters and older voters politically. Do you see any noticeable difference in the Israeli public?
Yeah, in Israel, everybody is born old.
So no difference then?
I do not, I mean, what you refer to is something very interesting about American politics, that there are many progressive conservatives in America. I mean, just look at John McCain's daughter. So many Republicans who are pro-choice. And you see many young Republicans who adopt and believe in values that only yesterday or decade ago, 2 decades ago, were progressive democratic values only. You don't see it in Israel. You don't see a generational adaptation of alternative value system yet.
So I'm going to put 2 questions together. In the last election, you could see parties came together either as pro-Bibi or anti-Bibi. Do you see anything of this in this election? And further, will a conviction of Netanyahu change anything in terms of the balance of power between left, right, and center?
This was my opening remark, which is you have 2 majorities in the Knesset. One yes, Bibi, no. One no to Bibi, and the other one is yes to conservatism. And I do not think it will be different this time. No doubt that the verdict of Netanyahu, unless he will go for a plea bargain, which I don't know the timing of it, if there is any timing for it, but without a plea bargain, if the court continues and the sentence continues with its natural course, the verdict will be years after the end of the political career of Netanyahu. So it has no impact, immediate impact, or even midterm impact on the political processes in Israel today.
Thanks. So going to take us in another direction here. Another thing you mentioned before is talking about that there's a 21% population of Palestinian citizens who are Palestinians who are citizens.
I never said 21%. It's a number I do not know.
Okay.
I said 19 to 20. Go
Got
on.
it. I might have read that in the chat box.
Yeah.
So if an increase in this population voting could make such a difference to the election? Why don't the left-wing parties, Meretz, Labor, or perhaps others speak more to these communities' rights? Why isn't that a strategy?
Talking about I mean, Meretz and Labor are dead parties walking. They're not real parties. It's a kind of hologram of the past. In order to steer about many things, not only about that. And I can say the same about the United List and a few others. They are living on their energy. It's like, you know, the new Webb telescope, which takes photos of galaxies passed away 30 billion years ago. So you see the lights of passed away galaxies, but they're not really alive anymore. What you need in order to ignite or to reignite the democratic involvement and the political excitement of this community is to offer something that was never offered to them. Labor is not a left-wing party. Labor, whatever it is, left it is not. That's the party who made the settlements possible. That's the party who actually created the Nakba. That's the party that was responsible for so many other things in the eyes of the Arab population and community in Israel. And therefore they cannot actually reinvent themselves. What you need is a new body politics with a new agenda, with a new platform, new faces to address this community.
And you're going to put that together, yeah?
I'm working very hard on it. Listen, I'm a pathetic person. I'm old. I was labor. I belong to the privileged classes of Israel. And still, I believe that a party like that is needed. And among other reasons, because I want to vote for them. Okay, so I work very, very hard in order to make it possible. Will it happen this time, next time, one next time? I don't know. But since practically speaking and physically speaking, in my life, I'm a marathon runner, I have a long patience. I run 70 miles a week. It's okay. I have my patience.
Nice. So you might have already spoke to this question earlier in the talk, but it's come up twice now. Radical American settlers, both their impact on this election and also the election's impact on them. If you could speak to that a little bit more.
There is no doubt that the West Bank is an integrated, inseparable part from Brooklyn. There is no doubt about it, okay? But I see whomever lives here in Israel, even those who just recently came, I see them as Israeli citizens and not an American citizen. So I deal with them as Israelis. What do you do with your own conservative, Jewish conservatives, etc.? It's a different affair. I ideologically and profoundly do not believe that Israel belongs to the entire Jewish people. It is not your state. Israel belongs to the Israelis. You can be fans of it, like I'm a fan of Golden State, okay? But I'm not a Golden State player, among other reasons, because I do not live in San Francisco, okay? But Israel belongs to the Israelis. So whomever is an Israeli citizen, be it from a Moroccan origin or American origin, is an Israeli that will deal with him or her as an Israeli. A different question, which is very, very important. How comes that the Lubavitch movement is American one? Kahana is American. Baruch Goldstein is American. I mean, what is wrong with part of the American Jewish, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, conservative, nationalistic Jewish education that produced these rotten apples? It's a question I ask myself. Maybe I have few answers, but it's not my responsibility, it's yours.
Is there anything you could say as to an American audience that could, ways that we could impact our own American community?
Our what?
Speaking to a mostly American audience now, are there ways that you see that we could make a difference in impacting these communities for the better?
About our elections or your affairs?
I think I'm just taking it into a different direction. We were talking about, radicalized American communities going over there and
First, First, I will make an honest proposition. If you want to dedicate a special session about what's going on out there, I'll be the happiest to contribute by 2 nickels, okay? Having said that, I will say as follows. Look at 2 kinds of dynamics. 70 to 75% of American Jews are voting for the Democratic Party. Yet, when it comes to Israel, I'm not at all sure that this entire 75% of American Democrats are married to the same values when it comes to Israel. It's wrong to accept that 70% of American Jewry are supporting democratic progressive Israel. So the first question is for you to ask yourself, where's the gap? Why do I have a dual system, AC-DC? Which means for DC, I have a constitutional American equality, democratic wall of separation between church and state system. And when it comes to Israel, I accept a fusion between church and state, prioritization of one ethnical group over the other, ethnical democracy, unfairness in the distribution of the public affairs, and I call it my state. What's wrong with the value system? The second is, which is no less important, and this is when you look at the entire progressive camp in America, and I'm not the first one to indicate it, it is so fragmented into tiny, unconnected between themselves, identity political groups, that by the end of the day, the democratic progressive groupings in America, like in England, like in France, like in Israel, cannot offer to the public a concept of collective good. I stand for the LGBT, I stand for the African American, I stand for the Jews, I stand for the women, I stand for this, I stand for that, but who stands for us all? Who stands for the nation? So as long as the progressive camps around the Western world and the democratic hemisphere will not call their act together and prioritize the collective good, whatever this collective good is, it might be equality for all, it might be whatever it is, over the fragmentation into tiny identitarian fragments, it will never come back to power.
Thank you.
But it's a different discourse.
A different topic, a different talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for those of you out there who are interested in American complicity, we just had a talk on the American political system with Jeremy Ben-Ami and Jim Zugby, and we're hoping to do a few more talks on the different aspects of the American community. So please stay tuned for that, and just, different aspects of the American community that help uphold the occupation. So stay tuned. And I think we maybe have time for one more question. We're ending in 6 minutes. But I'm going to go back to the basics here of a question. Could you just discuss which parties you think will be running, which parties you don't think are going to survive? Just sort of the basics, if there's any insight into that.
At the right, all the parties will run and survive. At the center, all the parties will run and survive. At the left, Meretz and Labor will struggle for the same constituency and popular vote. Both will have a beautiful, persuasive Gewalt campaign. Gewalt, Gewalt, help, help, help campaign. And by the end of the day, they will both pass.
Thank you. So I think it is 5 minutes to the end. If anybody wants to get their question in right now is the time to text in the chat box. But in the meantime, I'm just going to wrap it up and say, Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. And thank you
very much
so
for
much
the
for being
patience.
here. Yeah, for our technical difficulties in the beginning and the driving difficulties in the beginning. And thank you so much, Avrum, for joining us
Till
today.
next time, I'm always here for you.
Thank you.
Bye.
And there were a bunch of questions in the chat box about, American radicals, about how Americans can help. And so for those of you who are international, who want to be of support, I just want to say that's like really beautiful. And we're really grateful for everybody abroad, across the world, who support and want to make a difference. And so one thing that you can do is support the grassroots groups on the ground who are really working to end the occupation. So, of course, American Friends of Combatants for Peace is a 501c3, and if you would be able to send a gift, it would make a huge, huge difference. Grassroots pressure is one of the main ways that communities can influence the election, and that is the work that Combatants for Peace is doing. So we'll send out a link about that. I have a question. Why didn't you ask my question? I didn't see your question. We have a question about climate change. So, and also want to know what you would call your new party. So I'm going to throw those two questions out and then we'll close. Climate change and energy security, does that play any role in the election? And also, what would you call your party? Like this party that you want to create, what would you name it?
Well, first, the climate change, etc., doesn't play any role here. I mean, I don't like it, but it doesn't play any role here because we have Iran, and because we have ultra-orthodoxy, and because we have this, and we have that, and we have this and that. It's not an issue, any issue. The green issue is not on the table. What will be the name of the party? Well, from my point of view, on my desktop, it is called Equal and Influential.
Nice. Thank you.
Bye, dears.
Thank you. And everyone, please stay tuned for more of our summer series. As I mentioned a little earlier, we had another call with really excellent experts a few weeks ago, and we've got a bunch more coming up. We're trying to get you as much education, deep education as we can. So please stay tuned, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again, everyone. Bye.
Bye. רגע, תומר תקוע בפקק הזה בחמד ולא מצליח. תומר של התנור תקוע.